In the glittering halls of Eldoria's royal palace, where centuries-old traditions clash with modern ambitions, a single moment of public humiliation threatens to shatter the careful balance that has kept the monarchy intact. When Lady Victoria Ashworth, stepdaughter of Queen Consort Isabella, delivers a cutting insult to the beloved Princess Eleanor during a charity gala broadcast live to millions, she unknowingly triggers a chain of events that will expose long-buried family secrets, challenge the very foundation of royal protocol, and force Crown Prince Alexander to choose between family loyalty and the future of the crown itself. What begins as an impulsive act of spite in the spotlight soon becomes a battleground where personal vendettas, political maneuvering, and the weight of royal duty collide in ways that will forever change the House of Montclair. The crystal chandeliers of Eldoria's grand ballroom cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as the kingdom's elite gathered for the annual Children's Foundation Charity Gala. Crown Prince Alexander Montclair adjusted his formal military dress uniform, the weight of his ceremonial medals a familiar comfort against his chest. At 35, he carried himself with the practiced grace of someone born to rule, though tonight his usually composed demeanor showed subtle signs of tension. The evening had been carefully orchestrated down to the smallest detail. Every guest list, every seating arrangement, every moment of the program had been reviewed and approved by the palace's protocol office. Yet Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. "Your Highness," whispered his private secretary, Marcus Thompson, appearing at his elbow with the practiced invisibility that came from years of royal service. "The media pool is in position. The live broadcast begins in 20 minutes. Alexander nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Near the main entrance, he spotted his beloved aunt, Princess Eleanor, gracefully working the room. At 62, Princess Eleanor remained the most popular member of the royal family, her decades of dedicated charitable work having earned her the genuine affection of the people. She moved through the gathering with natural warmth, stopping to speak with donors, volunteers, and children from the various charities being honored tonight. Princess Eleanor had never married, dedicating her life instead to service. She had been Alexander's confidant since childhood, the one person in the palace who could speak to him without the filter of formal protocol. Her silver hair was elegantly styled, and she wore a deep blue gown that had been designed by one of Eldoria's most promising young designers, a deliberate choice to support local talent. "She looks radiant tonight," came a voice from behind Alexander. He turned to find his stepmother, Queen Consort Isabella, approaching with her usual regal bearing. Isabella had married Alexander's father, King Charles, 5 years earlier, bringing with her a daughter from her previous marriage. The transition had not been entirely smooth, particularly given the public's continued devotion to Alexander's late mother, the beloved Queen Margaret. "Aunt Eleanor always does," Alexander replied diplomatically. "The foundation means everything to her." Isabella's smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to appear genuine, controlled enough to maintain royal dignity. "Of course, though I do hope tonight's speeches won't run too long. Victoria has been looking forward to her presentation." The mention of Lady Victoria Ashworth made Alexander's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Isabella's 28-year-old daughter had been a source of constant friction since joining the royal household. Victoria possessed a sharp intelligence and undeniable charisma, but she wielded both like weapons, particularly when she felt overlooked or underestimated. "I'm sure Victoria will represent the family admirably," Alexander said, though his tone suggested otherwise. As if summoned by their conversation, Victoria materialized beside them, resplendent in a crimson gown that had undoubtedly cost more than most people's annual salaries. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face and the calculating gleam in her green eyes. "Alexander," she said, offering her cheek for the customary royal greeting. "How wonderful that we're finally allowing the Children's Foundation to have their moment in the spotlight. It's been, 3 years since they've had a proper royal patron." The barb was expertly delivered with a sweet smile, but Alexander caught the criticism embedded within. Victoria had been lobbying for months to be named patron of several high-profile charities, positions that had traditionally been held by senior members of the royal family. Her requests had been politely but firmly declined by the palace's Charitable Works Committee. "The Foundation has always had our full support," Alexander replied evenly. "Aunt Eleanor's patronage has been invaluable." "Oh, absolutely," Victoria agreed, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Though one does wonder if perhaps it's time for some fresh energy. After all, charity work requires such stamina, and Princess Eleanor has been carrying such a heavy load for so many years." Isabella shot her daughter a warning look, but Victoria seemed not to notice, or perhaps she simply chose to ignore it. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Chancellor Pemberton, the palace's chief advisor and a man whose political instincts had served 3 generations of Eldorian monarchs. "Your Highness," he said, bowing slightly to Alexander, "if I might have a word before the program begins." Alexander excused himself and followed Pemberton to a quiet alcove overlooking the palace gardens. The older man's face was grave, and Alexander felt his earlier unease intensify. "What is it, Pemberton?" "Sir, we've received some concerning intelligence from our contacts in the media. It appears that several tabloid journalists have been asking questions about Lady Victoria's activities." Alexander's blood ran cold. "What kind of activities?" "Her recent trip to Monte Carlo, for one. There are rumors of gambling debts, possibly substantial ones. Additionally, there have been inquiries about her relationship with certain individuals of questionable reputation." The Crown Prince closed his eyes briefly. The royal family's reputation was built on centuries of carefully maintained dignity and moral authority. Any scandal could damage not just the individuals involved, but the monarchy itself. "How substantial are we talking about?" "Our sources suggest possibly 7 figures, sir. And the individuals in question include several known associates of the Volkov crime syndicate." Alexander felt the weight of the crown that he would one day wear pressing down on his shoulders. The House of Montclair had survived wars, revolutions, and scandals, but in the modern media age, even a hint of impropriety could be devastating. "Does she know that we know?" "I believe not, sir. However, her behavior tonight suggests she may be under considerable stress. Our protocol officers have expressed concern about her participation in the live broadcast." Through the alcove's window, Alexander could see the television crews making their final preparations. In less than 15 minutes, the gala would be broadcast live to millions of viewers across Eldoria and beyond. The event was meant to showcase the royal family's commitment to charitable causes and provide positive publicity for the monarchy. "Should we remove her from the program?" Pemberton shook his head. "At this late hour, it would cause more speculation than her participation. However, I've instructed our media team to be prepared for damage control." Alexander returned to the ballroom with his mind racing. He found Princess Eleanor near the stage, reviewing her notes for the speech she would deliver to introduce the evening's honorees. She looked up as he approached, and her expression immediately shifted to one of concern. "Alexander, you look troubled." He glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "Aunt Eleanor, I need you to be particularly careful tonight. There may be complications." She studied his face with the wisdom of someone who had navigated royal politics for decades. "Victoria, I can't say more right now, but please, just be cautious." Princess Eleanor nodded slowly. She had always been perceptive about the undercurrents that flowed through royal family dynamics. "I understand." The lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling that the program was about to begin. Alexander took his place at the head table, flanked by Isabella and Victoria. Princess Eleanor moved to her designated seat nearby, and the assembled guests settled into expectant silence. Lord Chancellor Pemberton stepped up to the podium, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics and the television cameras that would carry his words to millions of homes. "Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, distinguished guests, and viewers at home. Welcome to the annual Children's Foundation Charity Gala, an evening dedicated to celebrating the tireless work of those who dedicate their lives to helping Eldoria's most vulnerable young citizens." The camera panned across the royal table, and Alexander forced himself to maintain his composed expression even as anxiety gnawed at his stomach. Beside him, Victoria sat with perfect posture, her hands folded primly in her lap, the picture of royal propriety. But Alexander noticed the slight tremor in her fingers, the way her jaw was clenched just a fraction too tightly. Tonight, we are honored to have Her Royal Highness Princess Eleanor present awards to this year's outstanding volunteers and donors. Princess Eleanor has served as patron of the Children's Foundation for over 20 years, and her dedication to improving the lives of disadvantaged children has been an inspiration to us all. The audience erupted in enthusiastic applause as Princess Eleanor rose gracefully from her seat. She moved to the podium with the natural poise that had made her one of the most beloved members of the royal family. The cameras focused on her warm smile as she began to speak. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you all for being here tonight. When I first became involved with the Children's Foundation, I was struck by a simple but powerful truth. Every child deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. Her voice carried the passion that had driven her charitable work for decades. Alexander felt a surge of affection and pride as he watched her command the room's attention. Over the past year, the foundation has helped over 50,000 children access education, healthcare, and support services. We've opened 3 new community centers in underserved areas, launched a groundbreaking literacy program, and provided emergency assistance to families in crisis. As Princess Eleanor continued her speech, highlighting the foundation's achievements and introducing the evening's honorees, Alexander noticed Victoria becoming increasingly restless. She shifted in her seat, her fingers now drumming silently against her clutch purse. Her fixed smile was beginning to look strained. The evening proceeded smoothly through the presentation of awards to outstanding volunteers, major donors, and community leaders. Each recipient shared their story of involvement with the foundation, and the genuine emotion in their voices was clearly resonating with both the live audience and viewers at home. It was when Princess Eleanor returned to the podium to conclude the program that things began to go wrong. Before we close this evening, Princess Eleanor said, her voice warm with genuine affection, I want to acknowledge the incredible support the foundation has received from the royal family. Crown Prince Alexander's leadership on the Youth Advisory Council has been invaluable, and Queen Consort Isabella's patronage of the Early Childhood Development Initiative has brought much-needed attention to the importance of early intervention services. Victoria's smile became even more rigid. Alexander could practically feel the tension radiating from her as Princess Eleanor continued. I also want to recognize the many young members of our extended royal family who volunteer their time and energy to support worthy causes. Their enthusiasm and fresh perspectives remind us that service to others is not just a duty, but a privilege. The comment was meant to be inclusive and encouraging, but Alexander saw Victoria's face flush with what he recognized as barely controlled anger. The young member's reference felt like a deliberate slight to someone already feeling excluded from the inner circle of royal responsibilities. As we look to the future, Princess Eleanor continued, I'm confident that the foundation will continue to grow and adapt to meet the changing needs of our communities. With continued support from generous donors, dedicated volunteers, and committed royal patrons, there is no limit to what we can achieve for Eldoria's children. The audience began to applaud, but Victoria chose that moment to rise from her seat. The movement was sudden enough to draw attention, and several cameras swung to focus on her. Alexander felt his heart rate spike as he realized what was about to happen. Victoria stepped forward, moving toward the edge of the platform where Princess Eleanor stood. Her posture was rigid with determination, and her green eyes flashed with barely concealed fury. If I may, Victoria said, her voice cutting through the applause with surprising force. The microphone picked up her words clearly, broadcasting them to millions of viewers who were about to witness something unprecedented in the usually carefully scripted world of royal public appearances. Princess Eleanor looked surprised but maintained her composure. Of course, Lady Victoria. I think it's wonderful that we're celebrating the past 20 years of the Foundation's work, Victoria began, her tone deceptively sweet. Though I can't help but wonder if perhaps it's time to acknowledge that some approaches to charity work have become outdated. Alexander half rose from his seat, but Victoria continued before anyone could interrupt. After all, in today's world, effective charitable work requires more than just showing up to galas and cutting ribbons. It requires genuine engagement with modern social media, understanding of contemporary issues, and the energy to actually connect with young people on their level. The ballroom had fallen completely silent. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, sensing that something significant was happening. I mean, no disrespect to Princess Eleanor's historical contributions, Victoria continued, the pause before historical, loaded with meaning. But perhaps it's time to admit that someone who has never raised children of her own, never worked in the modern economy, and never actually lived in the real world that these disadvantaged children face might not be the most effective advocate for their needs. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Alexander watched in horror as Princess Eleanor's face went white, then flushed crimson. The cameras captured every moment of her shock and pain, broadcasting it to millions of viewers who were witnessing the deliberate humiliation of one of their most beloved royal figures. Victoria wasn't finished. I'm sure everyone appreciates Princess Eleanor's dedication, but dedication without effectiveness is just, well, it's just going through the motions, isn't it? Perhaps it's time for the foundation to have leadership that actually understands the challenges facing modern families. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as he watched his aunt struggle to maintain her composure under the most public and cruel attack imaginable. Then, Princess Eleanor did something that revealed the steel beneath her genteel exterior. She straightened her shoulders, looked directly into the nearest camera, and spoke with quiet dignity. Thank you, Lady Victoria, for sharing your perspective. I believe the true measure of charitable work lies not in self-promotion or criticism of others, but in the lives that are actually improved by our efforts. The children and families served by this foundation are the only judges that matter to me. She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. Now, if there are no further contributions from the audience, I believe we should allow our guests to enjoy the remainder of their evening. The dismissal was gentle but unmistakable. Victoria stood frozen for a moment, perhaps only now realizing the magnitude of what she had just done on live television. Then, she turned and walked stiffly back to her seat, her face a mask of barely controlled emotion. Alexander felt something fundamental shift inside him as he watched his aunt handle the attack with such grace and dignity. The fury that began building in his chest was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Victoria hadn't just embarrassed herself or even the royal family. She had deliberately tried to destroy a woman whose only crime was decades of selfless service. As the evening's formal program concluded and the guests began to mingle over coffee and dessert, Alexander caught Pemberton's eye across the room. The Lord Chancellor's expression was grim, and Alexander knew that the real consequences of Victoria's public assault were only beginning. The story would be front-page news across the globe within hours. Video clips would be analyzed frame by frame on social media. Royal correspondents would dissect every word, every facial expression, every nuance of the exchange. But, for Alexander, the most important consequence was much more personal. As he watched Princess Eleanor graciously accept the condolences and support of shocked guests, he realized that something irreversible had just happened. Victoria had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the royal family would never be the same. The war for the future of the House of Montclair had just begun, and it had been started by someone who thought she was fighting for a crown that would never be hers. Part 2. The silence in Crown Prince Alexander's private study was broken only by the steady tick of his grandfather's antique clock and the occasional rustle of papers as Lord Chancellor Pemberton reviewed the morning's press coverage. The mahogany-paneled room, lined with leather-bound books and family portraits spanning centuries, felt oppressive in the gray dawn light filtering through heavy curtains. Alexander sat behind his desk, still wearing the previous evening's formal shirt, though he had long since discarded his jacket and tie. His usually immaculate appearance showed the strain of a sleepless night spent in crisis management. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his typically perfect posture had given way to the weary slouch of a man bearing an impossible burden. The international coverage is extensive, Pemberton said carefully, setting down the latest stack of newspapers and tablet computers displaying online news sources. The BBC is leading with royal family in crisis. CNN has palace drama shocks millions, and the Eldorian Times headline is simply the insult heard around the world. Alexander didn't look up from the report he was reading, though his knuckles whitened as his grip on the papers tightened. Social media? #RoyalShame is trending globally. The video clip has been viewed over 10 million times in the past 6 hours. Most of the commentary is unfavorable toward Lady Victoria. That was putting it mildly, Alexander thought. He had spent the early morning hours scrolling through the endless stream of outrage, disbelief, and analysis. The consensus seemed to be that Victoria had committed an unforgivable act of public cruelty against a beloved figure. But Alexander knew that public opinion was fickle, and the damage to the monarchy's reputation could be lasting. A soft knock at the door interrupted his brooding. "Come," Alexander called, and his Aunt Princess Eleanor entered the study. Despite the early hour and the previous evening's ordeal, she appeared composed and elegantly dressed in a simple navy suit. Only the slight puffiness around her eyes betrayed the emotional toll of the night's events. "Alexander, Lord Chancellor," she said, settling gracefully into one of the leather armchairs facing the desk. "I trust you've both had as little sleep as I have." Pemberton stood and bowed slightly. "Your Royal Highness, may I express my personal apologies for what transpired last evening? The breach of protocol was unprecedented and entirely unacceptable." Princess Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Please, Pemberton, we've all navigated enough family difficulties over the years to know that these things happen. The question now is how we respond." Alexander finally looked up from his papers, and Eleanor was struck by the fury burning in her nephew's usually calm blue eyes. She had seen that expression only once before, when Alexander was 16 and had discovered that a trusted friend had sold private photographs to the tabloids. "We respond by ensuring that nothing like this ever happens again," Alexander said, his voice low and dangerous. "Victoria crossed every line of acceptable behavior last night. She humiliated you, embarrassed the family, and damaged the monarchy itself, all on live television watched by millions." "Alexander," Eleanor said gently, "I understand your anger, but we must be careful not to let emotion drive our response. Victoria is still family, and she is still Isabella's daughter." The mention of his stepmother's name caused Alexander's expression to harden further. "Speaking of Isabella, where exactly has she been during this crisis? I would have expected her to be here, offering apologies and explanations." Pemberton consulted his notes. "Queen Consort Isabella is currently in her private apartments. She has requested an audience with your highness at your convenience. However, she has made no public statements regarding her daughter's behavior." "How convenient," Alexander muttered. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where early morning joggers and dog walkers moved along the public paths. "You know, Aunt Eleanor, in all my years of preparation for the throne, no one ever taught me how to handle a family member deliberately sabotaging the institution I'm meant to protect." Eleanor studied her nephew's profile against the morning light. She had helped raise him after his mother's death, and she could read his moods better than almost anyone. The combination of exhaustion, fury, and deep hurt in his posture told her that this crisis was affecting him on multiple levels. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we should consider what might have driven Victoria to such desperate measures. People don't usually destroy themselves publicly without reason." Alexander spun around, his composure finally cracking. What drove her? What drove her was arrogance, jealousy, and a complete inability to accept that earning royal responsibilities requires actually demonstrating royal qualities. She wanted shortcuts, Eleanor. She wanted the prominence and prestige without putting in the decades of work that you have. "Sir," Pemberton interjected, "if I may, we've received some additional intelligence about Lady Victoria's situation that might provide context for her behavior." Both Alexander and Eleanor turned their attention to the Lord Chancellor, who pulled out a confidential file marked with the royal seal. "Our investigation into her recent activities has revealed that the gambling debts we discussed are indeed substantial. £7.3 million, to be precise. Additionally, she has been making regular payments to an individual named Dmitry Kozlov, who is known to have connections to various unsavory elements. Alexander felt his blood turn to ice. Payments for what? That's unclear, sir. However, the amounts and frequency suggest either blackmail or some form of ongoing obligation. The total over the past 18 months exceeds £2 million. Princess Eleanor paled. Blackmail? What could they possibly have on her that would be worth that kind of money? We're working to determine that, Your Highness. However, given the timing of last night's outburst, it's possible that Lady Victoria is under increasing pressure from her creditors. The implications hung heavy in the air. If Victoria was being blackmailed or extorted, her attack on Princess Eleanor might have been a desperate attempt to secure a higher royal profile and the financial opportunities that came with it. Senior royals could command substantial fees for private appearances and endorsements, though such activities were strictly regulated by the palace. We need to speak with her directly, Alexander said. If she's in trouble, we need to know the full extent of it before this situation gets any worse. As if summoned by their conversation, another knock came at the door. This time it was Alexander's private secretary, Marcus Thompson, looking unusually flustered. Sir, forgive the interruption, but we have a situation developing. Queen Consort Isabella has called a press conference for this afternoon. She's announced it independently, without consultation with the palace press office. Alexander and Eleanor exchanged alarmed glances. Independent press conferences by royal family members were virtually unheard of. All media interactions were carefully coordinated through the palace's communications team to ensure consistency and prevent contradictory messages. What possible reason could she have for calling her own press conference? Eleanor asked. According to the announcement, she intends to address recent events and clarify the royal family's position on charitable patronage, Marcus replied, consulting his tablet. Alexander felt the situation spinning further out of control. Give me a meeting with Isabella immediately. And I want Victoria there as well. It's time for some honest conversations. But even as he gave the orders, Alexander suspected that honesty might be the one thing in short supply in the coming confrontation. The palace had dealt with scandals before, affairs, financial improprieties, even the occasional criminal charge against distant relatives. But this felt different. This felt personal, deliberate, and potentially devastating to the institution he had spent his entire life preparing to lead. 2 hours later, Alexander found himself in the blue drawing room, one of the palace's more intimate meeting spaces. The room's pale blue silk wallpaper and delicate Regency furniture created an atmosphere of refined elegance. But the tension in the air was anything but refined. Isabella arrived first, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit that seemed chosen to convey both authority and mourning. Her usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back severely, and her makeup appeared designed to emphasize the sharp angles of her face. She had the look of a woman preparing for battle. Alexander, she said, offering her cheek for the customary greeting. I trust you understand why I felt it necessary to address the situation publicly. Actually, Isabella, I don't understand at all. Which is why you're going to explain it to me before you say another word to the press. The queen consort's eyes flashed with something that might have been surprise or anger. She was not accustomed to being spoken to so directly, even by the crown prince. My daughter was attacked by the media and the public for expressing legitimate concerns about the effectiveness of royal charitable work. As her mother and as queen consort, I have a responsibility to defend her. Your daughter publicly humiliated a woman who has devoted her entire life to service, Alexander replied coldly. She did so deliberately, cruelly, and in front of millions of viewers. There is no defense for that behavior. The door opened before Isabella could respond, and Victoria entered the room. She looked haggard, her usual polished appearance replaced by dark circles under her eyes and clothes that suggested she had slept in them. But there was still a defiant tilt to her chin that warned Alexander this conversation would not go easily. Victoria, he said, not bothering with social pleasantries. I think it's time you explained exactly what's been going on in your life. And I want the complete truth, not the carefully edited version you've been giving everyone else. Victoria glanced at her mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I don't know what you're implying, Alexander. I simply expressed concerns about the need for more effective royal charitable work. Cut the act, Alexander snapped. We know about the gambling debts. We know about the payments to Dmitry Kozlov. We know you're in serious financial trouble, and we know that last night's performance was connected to it somehow. The color drained from Victoria's face, and Isabella looked genuinely shocked. Gambling debts? Victoria, what is he talking about? For a moment, Victoria's defiant facade cracked, and Alexander saw something that looked almost like relief in her expression. The burden of keeping secrets was clearly taking its toll. It's not what you think, she said quietly. The gambling, yes, that got out of hand. But the payments to Dmitry aren't about debts. They're about silence. Alexander felt his stomach drop. Silence about what? Victoria looked at her mother again, this time with something approaching desperation. Tell him, mother. Tell him about Monaco. Tell him about the photographs. Isabella's face went ashen, and Alexander realized that whatever secret they were discussing, it involved more than just Victoria's poor choices. What photographs? Alexander demanded. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Isabella finally spoke. Last year, during the family vacation in Monaco, there was an incident. Victoria was photographed in a compromising situation with someone inappropriate. Define inappropriate. Married, Victoria said flatly. Very married. Very prominent. And very much not interested in having the photographs become public. Alexander closed his eyes and counted to 10. When he opened them, both women were watching him with expressions that mixed fear and hope in equal measure. Let me see if I understand this correctly. You've been paying blackmail money for over a year to keep compromising photographs from being published. The gambling debts are separate. And last night's attack on Aunt Eleanor was your way of trying to what exactly? Dmitry suggested that if I had a higher profile within the royal family, I might be able to arrange more lucrative opportunities to pay what I owe him, Victoria admitted. He thought that if I could secure a prominent charitable patronage, the associated benefits might help resolve the situation. So you decided to destroy Princess Eleanor's reputation in order to steal her position? Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. I didn't mean for it to come out that way, Victoria protested. I was going to suggest a co-patronage, or perhaps a gradual transition. But when she started talking about young members of the family and their fresh perspectives, it felt like she was mocking me. And I just snapped. Alexander looked between the two women and realized that the royal family was facing a crisis unlike any in its modern history. A senior member of the household was being blackmailed, was in debt to dangerous people, and had publicly attacked one of the monarchy's most beloved figures in a desperate attempt to improve her financial situation. The press conference is canceled, he said finally. Neither of you will make any public statements until we figure out how to resolve this mess. Victoria, you will draft a formal apology to Princess Eleanor to be approved by the Lord Chancellor before release. And both of you will provide complete information about these financial obligations so we can determine the full extent of the problem. Alexander, you don't understand, Isabella began. If we don't address this publicly, the speculation will only get worse. And if we do address it publicly without a clear plan, we could destroy the monarchy entirely, Alexander replied. This family has survived for 800 years because we've learned when to fight and when to be strategic. Right now, strategy is what we need. He moved to the door, then turned back to face them. One more thing. If either of you has been keeping any other secrets, now is the time to reveal them. Because I guarantee you, after last night's spectacle, every investigative journalist in the world is going to be digging into every aspect of our lives. It would be better for all of us if we control the narrative rather than letting them discover it. As Alexander left the room, he could hear the beginning of what sounded like an intense argument between mother and daughter. He suspected that there were indeed more secrets to be revealed, and that the crisis he was trying to manage was about to get much worse before it got better. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier.